everyone, today we are going to cover 8 things that pro players and challenger players do that you can also do in your very own games. These are all quite easy, but a lot of people don't do them. So before you can get into the more advanced stuff, you have to at least do the bare basics. And this is stuff that they do every single game. And it may seem simple, but it really does help a ton. So I don't know why more people are not doing this. So the first thing you want to do is have an idea of what you're going to go before going into the game. Shameless plug here, but you might want to have a good idea of what is good in the meta right now. Many ways to do this. You could either go on bunnymuffins.lol, click the meta snapshot, and look at a bunch of the top comps there. If you prefer a more stat-based approach, you could go over to teamfight.lol, hover over stats, go to comms, champions, items, augments, whatever you want, and all that information will be there too if you prefer the numerical approach. You could get even more detailed than that though. Some people have like full spreadsheets of notes on every single comp they play, what the best ways to get there are, what the backup plans are, but at the bare minimum, you should at least know what type of comps you like going. It doesn't have to be even one of the top comps, you just have to be good at it, and then move on from there. After that, I want you to think long and hard about what portals are being chosen in that particular game or what encounters you're facing. For example, if the Bard encounter comes up where everyone starts at level 3, even if you have the best start for Cogmaw reroll, you probably do not want to go for it because your leveling odds are all going to be messed up. Full list of encounters can be found by going to database and then clicking on encounters. For example, if you get the Bard encounter where each player starts at level 3, you probably do not want to be going Cogmaw reroll, even if you have a great start for it and great items, because you likely will not hit Cogmaw 3-star when you're turbo leveled up. Same thing from before, you might have pre-written strategies for all different types of portals and encounters, but you at least need to know the bare minimum. Next are things that you could check inside the game. So as soon as the game starts, you may notice whenever you watch anyone play who's good, they again hover over the portal, but they also check things like ink shadow items. So you could do that very quickly by going to the team builder, clicking on an ink shadow, and then hovering over it. And you could see in this game, we have Tattoo of Bombardment. That means that if you do happen to be going Kaisa or Senna, you don't need as many items on them. So if you have a bunch of defensive items in the early game, you might want to consider going for that since you don't need as many offensive items because of the ink shadow tattoo. Next, you want to be checking the Exalted. There are 48 different Exalted varieties. And again, it's always best to put down notes for each and every one of them, but at least look at it in game and consider what comps you like going and whether they fit those Exalted traits, or if you get some of the Exalted units dropped in your shop or from the loot orbs. That could drastically change what you play in the early to mid game and even the late game too. After that, once the augment screen pops up, I like doing a lot of data checking when this happens. So for example, here we see Harm Assist, Living Forge, and Freaky Friday. So I'm going to go to stats, augments, and type those all in. You can see that Harm Assist, the prismatic version at least, does not do very well at stage 2-1. It's averaging a 4.84. Freaky Friday, 4.31, pretty good. Living Forge, 4.88, pretty bad. So you want to reroll both of those unless you have a very specific strategy or a very specific start. After that, we see Shopping Spree, Behemoth Crest, and Stationary Support. So we could look those up too, and we see that Shopping Spree is just really good. And in this meta right now, I want to be going for either the Ashe or Kaisa builds or Fast 9 builds in a lot of cases. So Shopping Spree is absolutely incredible for that. It might be the best augment in the game. So obviously, it's best to have all the stats memorized for every patch, but we're only humans. We're just trying to play the game semi-casually and like hopefully we win here and there, you know? So that's why data checking helps me a ton. After that, every single pro player scouts early and scouts often. So you want to do this many times. You don't want to just do it once in the early game and that's it. You want to be doing this constantly throughout the game if you have extra time. Pretty much a lot of times when you're watching a fight or if you're just like AFK after you buy a couple champions, you're not doing anything. So use that time to scout. So we could look around here and see that a lot of people built Rageblade. Maybe someone has like the Wandering Trainers thing. So you could tell immediately what comps are going to be open and what comps are not. If you think pretty lowly of your opponents and you're like, hey, they built this thing or they have this augment, they're only going to hard force this, they're probably not going to pivot out. I tend to do that a little bit too. You can think of different comps that are going to be purely uncontested and you could try to mold your team into those builds. Another important thing about scouting is being able to see where your opponents are positioning. This matters more a bit in the late game, but it also matters for streaking in the early game. But if someone has a Lux, for example, like me, you want to be positioning your carries on the same side as them so they don't get stunned and hit by Lux all the time. You could also put your carry in the middle if you're a bit lazy, but then that leaves them susceptible to other attacks. I like to try to give myself at least like 3 seconds every turn at the very end to do my positional scouting. Now that we know what team comps our opponents are going, we want to try to tailor our team based on both the units that we're getting and the items that we're getting. So a lot of people, they see a 2-star Yorick like we did here, and they might force some sort of behemoth build right from the get-go at stage 1-4. And you could do that. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but most of the times it's not. You'll always have to match the items to it and see if the champion's good. Right now, Yorick's good if you get the carry Yorick augment, which is called Midnight Siphon. But since we did not get that this game, you can't really consider going Yorick that hard. Also, we don't have the best items on him. So even though we have a 2-star Yorick, we could play it temporarily, but don't fall in love with it. Always try to tailor your team based on what items you have. So I built the Rage Blade here, so we're most likely going to go some sort of Ash comp. Last but not least, we have this more advanced trick that was kind of discovered recently in China. So a lot of players noticed that some players in China were manipulating their augments. Previously, this didn't work, but someone figured out that some weird change happened and now this is allowed. So augments in stage 3 and 4 are tailored, which means they show up based on what you have on your board. But for some reason, when you re-roll your augments, it still tailors to your current board, not the one you played last round. So a lot of players are taking out certain synergies from their board before they re-roll their augments. Again, this only applies to stage 3 and 4. So you can see here, I took out my behemoths and my umbrals before I re-rolled my augments, just in case I don't get any behemoth or umbral augments, because I'm going for the Ash comp. Obviously, since these are silver augments, it doesn't actually change anything because I don't think there are trait related augments in silver. But if we fast forward to stage 4, I'm going to do the same exact thing, and then I'm not going to get any of those augments that I don't really care for. Getting Invoker augments or Porcelain might be fine because I normally play 4 Invoker and 2 Porcelain in this build. But you could argue that I should take out the Invoker as well, just to try to get more combat augments. But let's think about how easy all 8 of these little things are. Literally anyone can do it. You don't have to be special or built different by any means. The first thing, again, is to have an idea of what you're gonna do before going into the game. It doesn't have to be that complex. It just has to be like, oh, I wanna go for Cogmol, so let's try to figure out when I should do that. So if I have like a tier early, or if I have like a tier and a Nashers early, then okay, sure, let me go for Cogmol. And if not, let me try something else. That alone will save you a ton of time and energy every single game. After that, once the portal or encounter comes up at the very beginning, you need to think of how you're going to change your playstyle. So the game we had here, we had Radiant Blessing, which means that once you drop below 40 life, you get a ton of loot. So maybe I want to roll down after I hit that power spike instead of before. Also, I know that if I perma lose streak in the early game, I have some sort of comeback mechanic that I could kind of use to stabilize in the mid game. Next, once we enter the actual game in stage 1, you want to be checking the ink shadows while you're not doing anything as the PvE round is happening, and then you also want to check the Exalted. These 2 bits of information can drastically change your game plan, and you need to check it every single time. Then, once the Augment stage pops up, you want to be data checking. It's what most people do. So either have everything memorized or just data check as you're playing. Of course, there are exceptions. If you have an augment that averages like a 4.6, but you have like all the units for it, like obviously it's going to be good in those cases. But in every other situation where you have like an average game, data checking is going to be the way to go. Next, you want to be scouting early and often during stage 2 and stage 3. This is for both checking what people are playing and seeing how you can position against them. Also, if you are contested, always compare your spot versus the other person's. If they have more copies of the units that you want, if they have better augments, better items, then you probably want to let them have that comp. However, if you have a lot better items, a lot better augments, and a lot more copies of the unit, definitely don't be scared to just force the comp and wait for the other person to pivot out. If they do try to contest you, they likely will go 8th. Sometimes you happen to take some hits there as well, but if your spot's good, it shouldn't matter in a lot of cases. And then after that, once you've scouted, you want to try to lean into team comps that fit your items the best. So if you have a comp that doesn't need a lot of items, such as like a Yone comp, you really only need 3 items on Yone, maybe a few on Kayn. Maybe you don't want to be playing that as much on a portal that gives you a ton of items, because then you can't take that much advantage of them. Maybe you want to go into an Ash Lilia comp instead, because you have like 4 or 5 units that you want to itemize there. And they might be patching this a little bit later. Try to tailor your augments during stage 3 and stage 4 based on what trait augments you want to get or want to avoid. This is a super easy thing to change, so you should try to be doing it every single game. Just don't do it on stage 2. It's a waste of time there, because in stage 2 all augments are random. But hopefully this helps everyone become a little bit better at TFT. All 8 things we went over just now are not that hard. I could probably teach a 5-year-old how to do it, but you have to be consistent with it. You can't just watch this video once, do it in one game, and then forget about it after that. You have to be doing this every game to get a little bit of an advantage here and there. All these little things you saw, it might be like a 1% change, 2% change, but it all adds up because there are like a lot of these different tips you could kind of employ. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, do share it with a friend, and also check out the website bunnymuffins.lol and teamfight.lol.